Okay, everybody, welcome back. So this week, instead of toning with raw umber, I'm going to be toning with some burnt umber and a little bit of blue to get a much deeper, richer tone, because we are doing a much deeper, richer painting. So usually if I'm doing, and I'm using a lot of my Merige here, usually if I'm doing a higher key painting or a very cooler toned painting, I will use my raw umber as my tone, or maybe even some ultramarine blue and yellow ochre as my tone. So you will adjust those are pretty much the only two tones that I use, raw umber or this burnt umber mix. Unless I'm painting outside plein air, and then sometimes out there I don't tone at all, or I might tone in like a raw sienna or a yellow ochre to get a really golden tone. So I wanted to explain that before we go into this so that you understand in your own independent work why to tone something a certain way. It will basically set the tone for the painting, and whatever goes on top is going to be influenced by that. So that's the main thing that you have to keep in mind. Is like if I were to try to do a high key on top of this, everything would just end up being super muddy. All right. And if the overall temperature of your painting is cooler and you tone too warm, it can also end up, looking muddy too. So, all right. So as I mentioned, we are zagging the other way now this week and doing this much darker value, richer tones, warmer colors compared to last week. However, one of the things I want to show everybody in Vital Art Sessions is that the fundamental principles still apply. You can paint high key, you can paint low key or chiaroscuro, and still, everything is still the same. It's just the values might change, but that's one thing that I really do hope all of you gain. Out of this program. So, all right, is those fundamental principles that no matter, what your personal taste is, you can walk away with and use them. All right, so I've got my thirds here gridded out. I'm going to set my front table edge right quick. I do want it to be a little bit higher, just in case I wanted to get in, that little shell, the shell shape of the drawer pull. This table is very beautiful, and so I might want to put that in. And then we've got these two oranges over here. Of course, we've got our star of the show, the blue ginger jar. And remember, a good size to do there is 1/3 to no more than half the height. And then we've got these beautiful Chinese lanterns that are just going to go off stage. So I'm going to use some Merige on my paper towel and just really wipe away here that tone so that none of this tone dirties up or muddies up this beautiful cool light. While I'm doing that, I'm also going to be leaving what will be the shadow shape of this vase. So unless an object is transparent, it must have a light shape and shadow shape. And the shadow shape really holds in the light, gives structure to the form, and gives form to the object. So if you watched the drawing lesson in Vital Plus, you would understand too that this also just mimics this side of the curve. All right, then we've got a cast shadow down here from the Mandarin. I also want to take a little paper towel, wipe out some light where the light of the Mandarin is going to be here. And I just love these little pieces of rind that are bringing in another little small piece of light. Every painting I think needs to have a big shape, middle shapes, like these two shapes kind of become one bigger shape here, these two Mandarins. Okay, so you do want to look for finer things, and sometimes the finer things come in through, let's say, the pattern. There is a fine, delicate, by fine I mean kind of smaller and delicate pattern on this vase, or like some of these smaller or more mysterious branches and Chinese lanterns. So you do want to have a variety of shapes in your still life, especially in a larger still life. You know, maybe with like a vignette or something, you can, you know, not maybe have a lot of shapes, a lot of variety of shapes. The other thing to remember with painting is anything can become something, like a edge or detail on a bigger shape can fill that need for a smaller shape, and or maybe a brush stroke can create, you know, a sense of direction, or almost become another object or shape in and of itself with a brush stroke. So as you grow as a painter, you really start to see that it's not just about painting objects. You know, it's so much more than that. All right, so I'm just using some of this ultramarine blue and burnt umber here to kind of build in some of these darks. This does go really dark back behind and really dark back here. So this is a very kind of Dutch looking, Dutch inspired, you know, still life here, very traditional looking still life. All right, because eventually, you know, like the value of this shadow would be lighter, just so that you can see where the values are going here. So we've got our size and placement. We've held our proportions. We've got simple big shapes for the light. Simple shapes for the shadow, and now we can go to background color. I don't need to spend a ton of time in background color here, but I do like this, the green that this is bringing to the situation. It's kind of a good marriage between the orange and the blue. So ultramarine blue, raw umber, yellow ochre to make this really yummy, rich, beautiful olivey green back here. And you know, if you ever get a green that's just looking too green, you can always throw in something with a little orange or a little red to cut that green, especially red, like some red oxide or burnt sienna, or maybe a little cadmium red even. And then because our table is so rich and warm, I'm going to grab some of this transparent red oxide and, you know, kind of let's deepen that a bit more because it's a dark table, with some ultramarine blue for some of this really rich, deep, maybe even some alizarin in there, just to get it really rich and deep. Now, I won't have too much time to go into this, but at least, you know, you'll kind of know sort of a base color to start with there, and then build some darks and lights on top of that. And I might wipe out a little bit here where that little drawer pull is going to be. Okay, so after you do background, then you want to do shadow color. All right, for shadow color on these oranges, I'm just going to start with ivory black, cab red light or cab red medium, whatever you have, and then some cad yellow deep. I like the cadmiums for these shadows because they're more opaque, meaning they're going to cover the surface more. They also have a little more richness of color, so I really like that for the shadow color on these mandarins. Make sure you go dark enough here. This is a very low key, the value painting, the value is pitched very low here in this painting. So make sure you take those shadows dark enough. Remember, the more extreme the light looks on these objects, the more dramatic that light is, the darker and deeper we need to take those shadows. All right, now what about shadow on this icy blue vase? Very similar to last week's mixture, actually. Some blue, raw umber, maybe some a little Naples yellow to lighten it. You don't want to go too light though. That's always the trap, you know, is going too light. We do want it to be lighter, and actually it's a bit cooler than that background color. Let's put a little more blue, maybe a tiniest little smidge of white. So right here, this edge is where you can look to see how much, and actually some of that's reflected light, sort of a cooler reflected light. But just be careful, don't take that too light in value. Okay, so your shadows and your background should all sort of coalesce together and harmonize together, both in value and in color to some degree. Okay, let's get some light happening on that base. We want something really icy and cool. You know, doing cool against warm is perhaps the most impactful temperature contrast you can do, as well as here in this setup, extreme light against extreme dark is going to give you the most bang for your buck too. Versus, you know, what we did last week, sort of a secondary impact would be dark against light, the deep dark blue against the lighter background. But last week's setup was cool against cool. Everything is cool, you know, and that has a beauty and a harmony to it as well. But it's a little bit more of like a peaceful feeling. Oh, I should tell you this. Naples yellow light, white, and some ultramarine blue here, because this is the only thing that's going to go white is the highlight. So this has to have some color to it. And then it does get a little bit deeper and also kind of a little less colorful as we reach the nether regions here away from the light. So grab some of that red oxide on your palette or some of this orangey tone to mute it. Also, this whole area here, mute it. Meaning go a little less, a little more gray, a little less color, pure color in the mix. And then just kind of tickle that edge into shadow. Kind of sew these two edges together ever so gently. Do not over soften them. And then the only thing that's going to go even close to white would be the highlight. And even that, I'm going to sneak a little bit of cadmium yellow or cad lemon in it, because our focal color, what I like to call our focal color, is, that's not light enough in value, is in the yellow and orange family. So I'm just going to put a little bit. This has nothing to do with temperature of the light source. I'm just doing this to kind of harmonize that focal color. All right, if that is not jumping off the canvas, which it isn't, that means I need more color, or I need a harder edge. Need more color in that, the actual local color of the base, or I need a crisper edge on the highlight. So I'll start with a crisper edge there, and then I will put a little more color and lower the value of the base as well. So sometimes you have to do a little bit of both. What's really going to make this base knock it out of the park is that pattern being applied really crisp and clean, and in a very, just crisp and clean blue color. Make sure you put enough paint on here. You will regret it if you don't. Okay. And make sure that shape doesn't look too broken up. So sometimes how you're using your brush might be creating a lot of ridges or even a lot of value changes sometimes. So make sure that you apply it clean and flat. Okay, so now I'm switching down to number 2. I'm just using straight ultramarine blue. No need to overcomplicate matters here. And, you know, experiment with how you can use your brush, different types of brush strokes. The most important thing to keep in mind here is to make sure that you describe the form and the perspective. So all this pattern is narrowing closer together over here on the curve, and then it's curving with the curve of the pot. Here's a little more flat, you know, part of the form facing us, and then it's going to start to curve the opposite direction. So, and then I'm going to put a little touch of black in there to get it a little darker as we go into shadow. And now it's going to curve this way. But you can use the same brush to make like the little cherry blossom dots, and also turn the brush to the side to get finer lines. Voila. I'm more concerned with, you know, making clean strokes rather than, and clean color rather than did I copy that pattern exactly right. If it goes down clean and yeah, clear, meaning not vague, not overly fussed, then it will look beautiful. And if I concern myself more with describing form rather than copying pattern perfectly, it will be beautiful. Okay, we do have some up here. Gets very narrowed with the perspective, very foreshortened. Kind of all starts to blur together up there. Need to go dark. If I went darker over there, I'm going to go darker up here as well. Okay, so now let's get some local color on the mandarins. These are probably at least the ones that aren't peeled, are probably the easiest things to paint. Cad red light, cad yellow deep. These can go a little darker over here. That's way too red. Let's put in some more cad yellow deep. We don't want them to look like tomatoes. We want them to look like mandarins. So it's interesting with fruits and vegetables, if you get your color off just a little bit, like if you make it too red or if I made this too pastel, too much white in the mix, it no longer would look like a citrus fruit, you know. It might start to look like a peach or an apricot. So even though there's highlight on these, make sure the overall local color stays looking very vibrant, very saturated and bright. While I have some of that on my brush, I'm just going to kind of get some color notes up here on these lanterns. You can do these lanterns or leave them out, it's up to you. I really just added them in case you did want to explore those more. We do have some full lessons that really focus on lanterns in the lesson library, so if you're interested in them, definitely check out those lessons as they are a lot of fun. All right, now I like to finish as I go, so let's get a little bit of highlight on front and center of the form. Just kind of shovel load the tip of light on the tip of white paint on the brush. I'm just using the mixture that I used for the cool blue vase as the cool highlight on these. No need to agonize at all over a different color mixture. Reflected light tends to round out the other part of the sphere and also communicates that all of this is super lit up over here. Also, use a little bit of that background color on the turning planes of the sphere to mute its complementary color, to mute and also soften the edge into the shadow. While you've got this color on your brush, this orange, get reflections. Get these reflections. You know, reflections, reflected light, you know, that, you know, just illuminates the whole painting. Now we've got a much cooler yellow color, so we need Naples yellow here. Need a really crisp overlapping edge in front of the vase for those the little rind over here as well. Put down a nice thick amount of paint. You really want that to look lit up. You know, the key with light and shadow painting is that you know, your whites, your lights must be lit up enough. And oil paint dries darker and thinner than what it looks like wet. So that's why it's so critical that you push your light here, that you apply it super thick, super lit up that first day. You know, on the vase, the light on the rind. Otherwise, you know, this, by the time it dries, you could have thought that you had something looking really lit up, but then it dries and it's like, oh no, it just looks dark and dingy. Look for these reflections. Get these in. You notice my brush, I'm turning to the side to, you know, just get a narrow edge. Okay. So compare this color to that color. It's a lot lighter. So I'm using straight up Cad Yellow Deep. Again, no need to complicate matters. I already put in the little edge. It's like a little shelf catching the light. Now, this is a 2. I feel like I need a 1, but we'll keep going here on the brush size. Now, that kind of, what is it, like the little membrane stuff? That is very, very cool, very white. I'm just kind of slathering that on and trying to kind of curve it with the shape. If I pick up some of that Cad Yellow underneath, it's all good. Basically pushing that paint around to kind of mix it in and create these wet into wet effects, but this side should read cooler than the other side. And again, of course, you can paint larger. I just paint this size for the demos, and so that I can show you something in 30 minutes. A short amount of time. But main thing is you want that side to go cooler. Okay, and then some of that does show up. You can also, over here, it's not quite as lit up. Maybe we'll just use some Naples yellow. You could also break out your palette knife to try to get, you know, a finer, sharper edge. Get that, pull it on the very, very edge of that. And again, you want to sneak in some of this background color. For this would be the shadow plane here, but it's a transparent object. So it's kind of like painting a piece of glass almost, or a grape. You kind of have to go a little bit darker first, almost like you're putting in a little edge of shadow, and then you could put in some glow. Something a little glowier with more cadmium, or this Chinese, I love this Chinese orange. Let's see what some Chinese orange, just with a little pinch of, oh, maybe a little pinch of Naples yellow. Let's see what that looks like. Because the Chinese orange is totally transparent, but it has a really glowy feeling to it. Let's do a little Cad lemon and Chinese orange. Ooh, that's nice. That's nice. Okay. Make sure this edge up here also, some of this membrane kind of got lost, the rind, but I think we need some of that coolness and opacity to create the effect, and also a sharper edge up here overlapping in front of the background, and also to really get that full effect of the glow. Sometimes you get lucky and a lot of that stays on there, and sometimes it peels right on off. You need a little more color there, so going back to like the color we had over here for the rind. Cad Red Light and some Cad Yellow Deep. Because not all of this is totally in shadow. There's still a little bit of light catching on that side. Same thing on this rind. And while you're there, just kind of carve out that shape a little bit more clearly. We also need some reflected light, reflected color in here from that orange, which might eat up some of our pattern color, but that's okay. If anything, always go for light effects. All right, for this little brass knob in front, which I think will give us some really amazing depth, I'm going to use some yellow ochre and raw umber to start it. I'm just going to make this little half moon shape first. You always want to start with, what's that basic shape, and then build on some details. Okay, so underneath that, the cast shadow in the wood is really what's going to pop this even further and give us more depth. So I really want to carve this out kind of sharp and clean down here. So some black, some red oxide, maybe even some alizarin. Yeah, maybe alizarin and black to really push it dark. You always want more contrast in your foreground up front to get more depth. More value contrast, more sharp edges. We also have cast shadow underneath this table edge as well, which I think maybe I should shorten this a little bit more. But your darkest, richest dark should be in the foreground somewhere. Either a cast shadow underneath something. It should look darker than what, and look more contrasted than what's back in the background. If you're doing one of these chiaroscuro type paintings. I need to make this a little smaller. Misjudged the space. Okay, and then you can start to put on some highlight. Let's do some ultramarine, some yellow ochre, and some white. Some of this highlight has kind of a silvery patina, and then some of it's very golden. I wonder which one we should do. I guess we'll try both and then see what we think about it. I do like to use a palette knife for highlights because, especially wet into wet, it puts them on so nice and clean, and it also stays sitting on top of some cad lemon here. I think we need a little bite to this color. And it stays sitting on top of the other mixtures. Now, it's kind of got this shell-like pattern catching light as it curves around. And again, to get a sharper edge, I think the palette knife is the way to go here. But sometimes stuff like that might happen, so you just gotta kind of come back with the brush and maybe clean it up a little bit. Okay, same thing with like light. One thing I didn't get was any reflected light from that really cool vase, the icy blue from the base reflected on the tabletop plane. That is a big no-no to leave that out. But I gotta make sure I don't just put it everywhere because it wouldn't show up way the heck over here. It would only show up like a mirror or a still pond. These high glazed, highly shiny vases, you want to reflect whatever's above them on top. And it can be super subtle, but it's important to do it. Okay, last but not least, let me just grab really quickly, guys, some cad lemon, some ultramarine blue to get some of these leaves. Oh, maybe a little orange. I think that's a little too cool for this color family of this painting. Get some of these leaves that are here. Little blue in with this orange color. Get some of these more subtle ones back here. Don't get too much impasto if it's in the shadow. And I just like how those kind of go off the canvas. Let's just really quickly kind of pull all of this stuff together to get something that might make a neutral that would be good for the those twigs. Ooh, or maybe this background green color would be good for those twigs. On twigs, branches, things like that, be careful not getting enough color in them or making them too, you know, too brown or too spindly. Give them enough thickness. That got a little too much white in it, sorry. You could also build up a little more texture here on this one in the foreground. And this is also where the knife can come in for some of these, for these ones that do go a little finer. But with branches, they always get thicker down by the base. You know, everything in nature tapers. A tree starts out much, much thicker and then tapers as it, you know, grows taller. All right, everybody, I hope that you have learned a lot from this setup, and I wish you much success and luck on it, and I wish you happy painting. Bye.